School. Welcome to our One School, One Book Assembly. To help us kick this thing off, I'd like to introduce to you your principal, Mrs. Farrell.
Good morning. I'd like to welcome you here today to the first in a series of assemblies that we will hold this year on some very important topics. Today's topic is about your summer reading. This is a great experience. It was the first time we attempted to have everyone, students, staff, and community and family members read the same topic so that we could have great discussions in our classrooms and in our homes. The topic that I take out of this book is community service. It's a topic that we discuss all the time. It's something that you do anyways, but you don't label it necessarily. Each one of us helps a neighbor, a colleague, a peer, when there's a need. And community service can look different in every situation. In this particular book, who would have thought of the acts the hero took on? Helping people stranded in their homes, caring for pets that were left behind, when putting themselves in danger. We're not asking people to put themselves in danger, but we're asking you to look outside the box and do good deeds. Not for the sake of getting the accolades, but for the sake of doing it as a good human being. So I ask you to give your full attention to these speakers that share with you their own experience. And it has changed them in the way they look at the things they do in their lives. And after today, in our classrooms and hopefully in our homes, we will continue to think what people have gone through and see what we can do to help each other to make each day better. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Farrell. We hope that this is just the first of many such gatherings this year and in the coming years for you. Our goal with this program was to not lessen the amount of reading we did over the summer, though I'm sure you appreciated that. Our goal was to start a school-wide and community-wide discussion using a common thread, one that would allow for the most participation possible. How often do you really get to go from your English class to your science class and then on to your math or history classes and potentially discuss or debate a topic that reaches so many different aspects of life? How often do you go home where your parents ask you at dinner, "What'd you learn today?" I know when I was a kid, the typical response around my family's table was nothing. And yet, how many of your family or friends actually read this book right along with you? Believe it or not, a lot of people picked up your book so that they could be a part of this. Many members of the community, in and outside of our school, read this book right along with you. For those of you who participated in this experience, thank you. I encourage you to start or continue some of our conversations from today. A great deal of planning and even debate went into making our One School, One Book selection, which of course was Dave Egger's Zeitoun. Prior to our selection, we were aware of the unfortunate criminal behavior of Abdul Rahim Zeitoun, the hero of our selection. We came to the conclusion that regardless of the negatives, this story would be a prime example for us to discuss and debate. We wanted to provide you the opportunity to take the positives out of some terrible circumstances. We wanted you to decide for yourself whether you read the events in the book as fact or fiction. In your classes, maybe you had the opportunity to debate or define the hero. Is Zeitoun a hero? Was he ever a hero? Though Zeitoun has clearly gone down a terrible path in recent days, he was a hero to many due to his selfless acts in the shadows of Hurricane Katrina. It is interesting to consider today who our heroes might be. Too often we put movie stars or professional athletes up on pedestals, and proclaim them heroes just to see them fall right back to the ground. And yet, look around here in the seats next to you. Who among you might be a hero today or in the future? To a brother or sister, to a niece or nephew? Who among you might be a hero to a classmate, to a student, to a teacher, to a friend or a perfect stranger for your selfless deeds? Think about that for a moment. Today, I would like to introduce to you two of your peers, Jamie Zajac and Jason Kenney, who have given of themselves for the greater good of others. I guarantee you these are individuals who do not consider their actions heroic, and yet there are plenty of people grateful for their hard work. Jamie and Jason are just a few of your peers who do not see community service as just a graduation requirement, but they see giving back to others as a necessary component of life. Both of them would like to share their New Orleans experiences with you. Please give your attention to senior class member Jamie Zajac.
Hey everyone. Last February, I had the exceptional opportunity to fly to New Orleans, Louisiana to help the community that fell victim to Hurricane Katrina in 2005. I lived for 6 days with 35 other students from all over the country at Camp Hope, an old middle school converted into a base for volunteers to eat and sleep. The upstairs middle hallway separated boys from girls, but the same bunk beds stood in each section. To be honest, I was at first uneasy about sleeping on the top of an unsteady bunk, but rationalized that a comfortable bed is a small sacrifice when helping people who had to abandon so much more. During the bus ride from the airport to Camp Hope, I looked out the window, amazed by what I saw. Some windows and doors of houses were still boarded, bearing the red spray paint that indicated how many bodies were found. The highest number I saw was 8. Houses that were completely destroyed still hadn't been rebuilt. I had no idea how it would help the people who didn't have a home anymore, or who I would be working with. Scott Harding, founder of the National Relief Network, planned the trip and introduced himself by saying, "This is a people program, and you will understand this after your first workday." For the first workday, the whole group rode to a local marina in Delacroix to volunteer at the Crab Trap Rodeo, a contest that rewarded the family who collected the most decrepit crab traps in an effort to protect blue crabs. My group's job was to carry the traps to shore, cut any excess ropes, crush the traps, and throw them in the dumpster. At the end of the day, the marina tallied over 700 crab traps. My secondary job was to talk to the people from New Orleans and learn about their struggle after Katrina hit. A fisherman named Buddy and his son Aaron gave 20 of us a ride to an island in the marshes. We brought a trash bag, and surprisingly it filled by the time we left the island. Buddy dropped out of school in the 10th grade to fish, but still hadn't learned how to read. Aaron told us how difficult it was to fish after Hurricane Katrina carried so much trash into the bayou, destroying the habitat. Hurricane Katrina, combined with the BP oil spill, contributed to the decline of the fishing industry. A degradation of the shrimp habitat means that the fishermen cannot make a living or support their families. One of Aaron's deckhands told us his powerful story that the news would not cover. As he was driving out of the city with his father to evacuate, a crowd of people rushed out of the convention center and attacked a school bus full of people until it fell over in front of his car. At this point, he was scared for his life, but thankfully he passed safely, only hearing later about the more frightening and more disturbing behavior in the convention center. The fishermen told us how they presumed the levee system broke, which contrasts what most people think. A European barge was scheduled to dock in the Mediterranean, but hadn't departed to avoid the storm. When the hurricane hit the Atlantic coast of the United States, the heavy winds and water currents carried the barge and crashed it into the levees protecting New Orleans. The storm water from the ocean then flooded the city so severely that I could still see damage 7 years later. For the second workday, Scott assigned my smaller group the hardest job, to restore the outside of a house. We started scraping the old, dirty paint off the house with an optimistic atmosphere. A few hours passed, and we had only completed scraping one side of the house. We began feeling pessimistic and upset that we wouldn't finish our job. Instead, we split up so that some people continued scraping while others started priming the house. We soon saw the slow but steady progress. When we approached lunch hour, although we were hungry, we were more persistent to give the family a fully renewed exterior. The top coat of paint dripped down the side of the house as it started raining, though we had finished painting the whole house. Wet and covered in paint, we were still satisfied to help another family in need. I never met the mother of the house, but Scott told us later that day how grateful she was that her house was clean and presentable again. When the whole group met for dinner that evening, the other semi-group shared emotional stories of the people they met, and even just hearing them secondhand, I sensed the intense struggle of what they endured and truly understood what it meant to them that I traveled to New Orleans to help. The third day, we regrouped and drove to Buccaneer State Park in Mississippi. Stu Rayburn, the manager, welcomed us and expressed his gratefulness for teenagers who sacrificed school time to help strangers. His story was another powerful memory of the devastating 2005 natural disaster. His family evacuated to safe territory in northern Mississippi, but he stayed back to protect his home. Unfortunately, he underestimated the storm's power. With a friend, he went to the local fire station where the firemen kept shelter. Water flooded up to their knees before they evacuated the fire station to look for higher ground and better shelter. By the time they waded over to the windows, the water reached waist height. Mr. Rayburn helped his friends out of the window to safety before braving the harsh winds and rain himself. The wind was so strong that he needed to hold onto the building or surrounding trees to avoid being blown away. After only a minute, he found himself hanging from a tree branch, clutching it for his life. He felt cold and tired, but knew if he let go, he would lose the battle against Hurricane Katrina. After hours of literally holding on for his life, he made his way back home to find his house devoured by the storm. Only the foundation was left. I lost count of the foundations of homes I saw on our way to Buccaneer State Park that had not been restored 7 years later. The eye of the hurricane hit Mississippi, so its Gulf Coast received the worst damage. So impressed by his amazing recount, we seemed more motivated to help him. The park had only reopened the previous spring after 5 years of restoration, but we still saw the damage. Mr. Rayburn handed each group of 5 buckets of bleach, brooms, hand scrapers, an empty bucket, and a hose, and explained our job of washing mold off the picnic tables. Throughout the whole day we scrubbed, ending with blisters and tired arms, however satisfied with our completed job. The cleaner tables looked much more welcoming to the visitors, who personally thanked us for our efforts. In our group reflection circle back at Camp Hope, each student shared his opinion of what we did for 4 days in New Orleans. We answered combinations of, we helped people, we learned about the culture, and we met a lot of people whose stories I will never forget. At this time, we all understood that it really is a people program and that it changes your life. When I read Zeitoun this summer, I felt I could relate to him in some way, that we both sacrificed something to help other people. Because of my recent trip in memory, I focused not on his incarceration, but the community service he performed. I wish to model the positive aspects of Zeitoun's behavior, such as rowing in a canoe to rescue helpless elderly from second stories of their houses, or feeding dogs who were left by evacuated families. My trip to New Orleans inspired me to plan a service trip with the National Relief Network and Ms. Scott for spring of 2013. You may not grasp it now, but after participating in a service trip like this one and talking to people who endured such losses, your life will change in a positive light, and you will appreciate why students are encouraged to complete hours of community service. This is only a factual account that does not come close to expressing the emotions I had throughout this trip. Now I invite you to join me on the upcoming trip in the spring to see a new culture and expand your palette of experiences. Thank you.
Thank you, Jamie. Please give your attention to senior class member Jason Kenney.
Hey friends, classmates, and teachers, what's up? What comes to mind when you think of Hurricane Katrina? I'm just an average kid like everybody else in this auditorium, but I took a week out of my April vacation freshman year to do some repairs in New Orleans. Not knowing many of the people that went on the journey with me was scary. Upperclassmen leading me and working with them on a job to fix a house. It is an experience and brought me closer to my friends and making new ones throughout the process. At first, I was appalled by the amount of labor we put into the project. But when we finished, I thought to myself, we really helped these people. My parents did not tell me I had to go on this trip. It was up to me. I was up for the adventure. Working rain or shine, yeah, we had some race where we had some laughs and went to rock and roll. But the highlight of the project was stepping high on the ladder and scraping away the old paint and painting a new look to the house. What I saw on television and what I encountered when I got there were two different places. There was still a lot of wreckage, but there was not water everywhere, as you might expect. Spring break freshman year, I had the opportunity of a lifetime to go to Disney World, but I threw that opportunity away when I heard of an even better offer that was taking a trip down to New Orleans with my youth group to repair a house. Not knowing what to expect when I went there, I was clueless. As I was flying, I was thinking to myself, hey, I wonder if there are parties on Bourbon Street every night, or if New Orleans was back to normal from the state of destruction. But as we got to New Orleans and went on a small bus to our youth hostel, it hit me how crucial the damage was from the hurricane. Years after the storm took place, houses were still uninhabitable after the storm and were still abandoned. I learned that many houses suffered damage from 6 to 20 feet of water from basement to chimneys. The trip meant the world to me, giving back for the sake of giving back, for nothing in return. Some people might hear of the chance to go down to New Orleans to help out, and without a second thought, they will pass it up and never think about it again. Not everybody is as reluctant as I was to have had a chance to go down, follow the storm, and repair wrecked houses. Many houses had markings on them from search teams. Markings were still up on the houses using the Katrina +5, which was an X-code exhibition. These codes were put on the houses by search and rescue teams in 2005, post-Katrina New Orleans. The searches were done by the National Urban Search and Rescue Response System. The meanings of these codes are as follows. A slash meant that the house was currently being searched. An X meant that it had been exited by the searchers. The left quadrant of the X was used as the identifier. The top quadrant of the X was the time and date that the person left the structure. The right quadrant was of any personal hazards. And the bottom quadrant was the number of live and dead victims still inside the structure. Most sectors of New Orleans made it feel as if there was nothing wrong with it. But as soon as I approached the damaged area, I could feel that the coolness of the empty structures that were still exhibited there, but nobody living in them. When I first saw the houses, I was intrigued and in shock at the state of disrepair that is still withheld inside New Orleans. Walking next to the levees and just thinking about the water coming out and roaming the streets of New Orleans and taking countless lives was devastating. A majority of houses looked like they had been vacated for years, and it looked as if some people were trying to rebuild them and start a new life, while others just gave up completely and drove away from their problems. Some people do it for the money, taking any chance to make some spare change, while others will do it to fulfill their community service hours for school, or even just to say that they went to New Orleans and spent time repairing houses. I was not in it for the money or the community service. I was in it for the feeling at the end of the day that I made a difference. I'm not going to tell you that you should go out and get community service done just to get it over with. You should take time out of your day, maybe even just an hour of your life, and help somebody out. Do it for the feeling of gratefulness, not for money. Anybody can do a job for money, but it takes a true person to do it for the satisfaction of helping somebody out and doing a good deed. It's a requirement to graduate high school, but you should have fun while doing it. Community service is about volunteering and an unpaid experience. It is a selfless act of kindness. It was a life-changing experience for me. Thanks.
Thank you, Jason. Please give your attention to Beth Horne.
We tried to get the words out. The words, this land is your land, this land is my land, but they just wouldn't come. We were tired, emotionally drained, and too angry to sing a song of celebration. During our trip to New Orleans, we had taken to singing the last verse of Woody Guthrie's song, the one that he didn't dare sing in his lifetime because he was in the McCarthy era. It ends with, I stood there wondering whether God blessed America for me. And coming home from a week in New Orleans, we wondered where we were a nation for all, especially the poor, the black. We had just come back from a week-long trip spent doing demolition in New Orleans. It was 2007, and we were telling our story to the church that had sponsored us. Will, my son, a high school junior, stood up and tried to speak, but all he could get out was, "This land was supposed to be for you and me." But I'm way ahead of myself. $5. A $5 bet changed my life. We were at a Battle of the Bands, and it was in 2005, just a few, I think it was probably a month after Katrina had hit. And it was a fundraiser to send money down there for relief. I was there with my son, Will, and my daughter, Ada, who was a freshman, and a group of their friends. And on the ride home, I heard it. "No way. No way. If you pull it off, I'll give you $5. You're on." To earn the $5, my son Will had to form a band, rent a hall, and do some Battle of the Bands. Because of this $5 bet, I've been to New Orleans 2 times to do cleanup work. The first in 2007, and then again with a church here in Melrose in 2010. I'm not sure Will ever collected the $5, but he did form a band, and he did raise almost $5,000 for Katrina relief. There they are. Free Willie and the Whalers, they were called. The first concert was held later that fall. It was at a Masonic Hall, and there were 2 other bands that played that night. The music was loud, it was rough, it was fun, and they raised more than $900 that first concert. By January, they had well over $1,500 raised. As the time went on, they were doing these concerts once a month. They were thinking of sending the money to New Orleans, but then a trip opened up to actually go and help with the demolition and rebuild. And so in April of 2007, we went, 9 teens, 4 adults. We went to Metairie, which is a part of Greater New Orleans. You can see some of the flooding that occurred there. There are some evacuees waiting to be transported out of the area. We actually stayed at the Church of the Good Shepherd. It's a middle-class neighborhood. They had probably about 1.5 feet of water in the church. So they were pretty quickly able to restore their building. Many though of their members though left. It was middle class, they had some means, so they left. And so by the time we went there 20 months later, many people still had not returned. Imagine for a moment, 20 months, more than 1.5 years after the hurricane, we went. Sections of the city still had no electricity and no water, so imagine. No electricity, no water, no movie theaters, no computers, no TV, no books, no schools. Many schools were still not open. You might have lost electricity for a day, maybe even 3 or 4 days, but imagine it stretching out on almost 2 years. Before we went, we were told that our physical work was important, but more important was just our being there, just listening to their stories. We were welcomed by the congregation that had returned. Many of them were living in the FEMA trailers, but they fed us and encouraged us and gave us kind of what we needed so that we could go out and help those with even a greater need. We were given a tour of the damage. Oh, this is where they slept. This is one of the levees that was breached, and this is one of the gates they put up to help with the water flow. That's where people lived. Now, it might look like fun to live in one of those. Some of you have probably gone camping and stayed in an RV. Imagine, though, a year and a half. Many houses looked like this. But what has stayed with me, one of the biggest impressions from that first trip, was actually our tour of the 9th Ward. The 9th Ward is a very poor section of New Orleans. It's bounded by the Mississippi River on one side and Lake Pontchartrain on the other. Forms kind of a bowl between the two. You can just go slowly through the next 8 slides of the 9th Ward. There was no life, no bird song, no insect sound, no car sounds, no people sounds. The trees had all died. The houses were deserted. The silence. The silence was the largest sound I have ever heard. You can see in the center of the building, it's kind of hard to see one of those X's that was described earlier. There it is more closely. You can see that in that one, it was actually searched twice, and there were no bodies found. So the next day, we got up and we were divided into our work groups. This is Miss Sophie's house. You can see up in the right-hand quadrant, her house was searched. This is the work group that I was with. If you look hard, you can find me way up in the back. Miss Sophie is in the front row. She's the black woman in the front row. She was in her late 70s. She had lived in New Orleans her entire life, had lived in that house for about 60 years. She was able to move back because she lived on the 2nd floor and her apartment had been largely untouched by the storm. The 1st floor apartment where her daughter lived, though, was completely submerged underwater. There was about 6 feet of water in her neighborhood, and so it was totally destroyed. She was a genteel, very hospitable woman. Was delightful to spend time with her, and she told us the story of what happened to her during the storm. Her rescuers arrived by boat about a day and a half after the storm occurred. They took her to a bridge overpass and left her there with this very large crowd on the bridge. They had no food. There were no bathrooms there, and there was water that was dropped in from a helicopter. They stayed there more than a day. There were pregnant women there, there were little children. From there, they went by helicopter, so they were picked up by helicopter. They were flown to another place, and then from there they were bused to the Astrodome in Houston. The whole time she spoke about this, she was in very hushed tones, her eyes were downcast. She said it was the most difficult time of her very long life. After that, she bounced from relative to relative until March, when water and electricity came back on in her neighborhood. But what she said was, you really couldn't depend on other people for help because everyone was in the same situation. They'd either lost everything or lost a family member. Since that time, she has relied on strangers, angels, she called us. See, she would look at us with our masks and our gloves and our hats on and call us angels. You could see some of the type of work that we were doing. We were removing all the sheetrock and then doing some mold remediation. You had to be real worried about the mold because it had a lot of bacteria in it. Isn't it amazing what a $5 dare to do something that seemed impossible, what a difference it made in my lives. We came home seeing in new ways. We were able to see our country through the eyes of Miss Sophie, and we wondered whether our land was a land for Miss Sophie, for the people of New Orleans and all the people of the 9th Ward. We did though see that we were all in this together, and when storms come into our lives, as they do come, we can be there for each other. We wanted to do more, and so we came back. My daughter came back 4 times, my son 2, and I came back 2 times. The second time I came was a little over 2 years ago with a church here in Melrose. You see that that's the group that came from Melrose. So if you look real closely, you might see some people that look familiar. A couple of them went through this high school. When we came the second time, we actually stayed in St. Bernard Parish. It's across the river. And St. Bernard Parish had 10 to 20 feet of water over most of the entire parishes, like our county, most of the entire area. 67,000 homes were destroyed. There, everyone lost. And so you really couldn't turn to your neighbor because they had lost everything as well. Canadian mountains. Carolyn Maine told us the story about how people were on their rooftops for as long as a week. People were coming around in boats, dropping off food and water, but there was no place to bring people to do, and the boats were small. People were giving up, their hope was going, and then all of a sudden the Canadian Mounties started to come. She heard from a friend, and what they called it was the people of goodwill are finally coming. And then after that, the volunteers started pouring in. I mean, we were seeing this on the news up here, and volunteers started pouring in from all over the country. Church groups, work groups. That was Carolyn's brother's fishing lodge. We stayed there. That's the bayou. That's the waterway where the people lived and worked. We arrived right after the BP oil disaster, the explosion and all the oil. It was so devastating to the area that the people couldn't even talk about it. They talked to us about Katrina and what had happened to them, but they couldn't even fathom what the oil was going to do to the economy and to their livelihood. The people of New Orleans, the people of St. Bernard's Parish, were able to see through their exhaustion and their anger, but it's because the volunteers poured in. They saw the difference that we could make. They saw the people of goodwill, and they knew that they were not alone. They knew, they could feel that this land of ours was their land too. We brought hope, we brought promise of a future. At the end of Zeitoun, after he's passed through all that he's been through, Dave Eggers writes these words: "There is no better way to prove to God and neighbor that you were there, and that you are there, that you are human, than to build." As he drives through the city during the day and dreams of it at night, he envisions this city and this country not as it was, but better, far better. A dark time passed over the land, but now there's something like light. It's slow sometimes, but progress is being made. If we can picture it, it can be. Dream big. Imagine the impossible, and then make it happen. This land of ours is your land, but it's the land for all. It was made for you, it was made for the people of New Orleans. It's up to you and people like you. It's up to you with your acts of kindness. It's up to you to rebuild our neighborhoods, both in places of disaster like New Orleans, but also here in Massachusetts. It's up to all of us so that this land can be made for all races, black, yellow, white, brown. A land made for many faiths, Protestants, Catholics, Muslims, Hindu, no faith. We can be a land made of welcome, a land made for you and me.
just for a few minutes if you guys have any questions. Teachers, staff, students, if you have any questions for your speakers in general about our one school, one book experience, please raise your hand, we'll come around. Otherwise, we will briefly wrap this up.
What percentage of New Orleans has been rebuilt?
Good question. Any of our experts have an idea?
I'm no expert, but what I can say is that so I went in 2007 and then 2010. There was a marked difference. One of the slides I put up was of the Ninth Ward the second time I came around. And when I went just 2 years ago, there were houses that had been restored even in the Ninth Ward. And in every neighborhood, you could see construction going on. However, in St. Bernard Parish, where I was, it was probably 10% at that point in time. So there's still a lot of rebuilding that needs to happen.
Are there future opportunities to help people down there?
There's a trip in the spring that I'm organizing with Ms. Scott to go down to New Orleans to help. The minimum number of people we need is 20. So, there you go.
Okay, guys, thank you. Thank you for your questions. I'm glad that some of you guys do seem interested in the trip. Right? Don't let it end there. There will be other opportunities to serve your community right here, right in your backyards, right in Melrose, right within our high school walls. Okay? Don't let the conversations from today stop. Continue this. As Mrs. Farrell commented, we are hoping to carry this sort of theme with us throughout the year. Mrs. Farrell now will show you guys how to exit. Thank you.
I'd like to take this opportunity to thank all the guest speakers today. I'd also like to especially thank you to Mr. Chernisky and Mrs. Singer in the English department for taking the time last year to research what we should work on. And we're looking forward to what will be our book for the following year. As you exit the auditorium, please go out through the front of the building and enter through the main entrance. You can go back to your B-block class with your teacher, and at that time, it's just about time for the bell to ring, pick up your belongings, and go to your next period class. Thank you for your time.